Well, good afternoon and welcome to this panel session, which is entitled Rewrite the Rules. My name is James Fry. I'm the facilitator for this session. I'm a partner with the law firm Mills & Reeve, and I head the firm's life sciences practice, which is a specialist practice supporting medtech and biotech businesses. You're all very welcome to this session. This session's a follow-on from a session that I facilitated last year at MedTech Integrates, which was really in the run-up to Brexit, the UK leaving the EU, and some of the predicted challenges for business around all of that. So we're really following on from the theme. I think one of the things that perhaps will come across from the panel discussion we're having is really just a bit of a lack of certainty at the moment for business, but also an opportunity for the UK to define new rules going forward, really to create opportunities for all, to create opportunities for business, and to really drive that patient benefit adoption of new innovative technologies. And it comes at a stage of massive technological innovation and development within the medtech sector. We now have some divergence from EU regulations. I'm sure we will touch on that in a bit more detail. There is a sense of limited resources around particular issues as well, which I'm sure we will touch on. So what I'm wanting to do is to look at what those challenges are for business, to look at how businesses are adapting, and then really to sort of do some horizon scanning. How does our regulatory system structures, processes need to adapt to really drive those opportunities going forward? And I've got an esteemed panel here, a broad cross-section of different views and interests. And so without further ado, if I just ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves. So perhaps if I start with Tim Andrews. Tim.
Thanks, James, and hello, everybody. My name's Tim Andrews. I'm Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Orca. Orca is probably best known for being the world's largest assessor of digital health products. And so in this regard, one of the things that I spend quite a lot of my time doing is working with the team, looking at a whole range of different digital health products, and in particular, two areas constantly come back to for us to kind of have to kind of discuss and get our heads around. And one is medical device status and classification, and the other one is evidence. And those are the two areas where, and to an extent, there's an overlap between the two. And that's the two areas that we look at when we're, very regularly looking at over 60 products a week. So that's that's kind of Orca's kind of beating heart. That's what we do as a kind of core thing. Medical device status and everything else is key to that. In addition, on top of that, of course, the reason we do that assessment is to support health and care systems to integrate digital health properly and to make it kind of part of their mainstream way of working. So that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And the assessment side of what we do is a sort of means to an end. And medical device regs is a huge part of that.
Thank you, Tim. Perhaps I go to Karen Taylor next. Karen.
Good afternoon, everybody. I lead Deloitte's Centre of Health Solutions, which is a research team, an independent research team within Deloitte that looks at some of the key challenges facing our clients across healthcare and life sciences, and looks to identify solutions. Most of those solutions are already out there. It's just finding them and sharing them through our research, but also understanding what really is challenging the medtech companies, the life sciences, pharma companies, and their relationship with healthcare. And we published some predictions at the end of last year. where one of them was on MedTech's role and its role in the Internet of Medical Things, linking to some of the things Tim was just saying, and how it will drive the future of health as we know it going forward.
And I suspect we'll get onto some of these fantastic new technologies and methodologies and how they can be used really to drive some of that growth and innovation. And perhaps actually the link is through to Alex Frankie.
Yeah, hello. Thanks, James, and good afternoon to everyone. So I'm a professor at the University of Leeds, both in the School of Computing and in the School of Medicine. I lead the Center for Health Technology Innovation together with David Jane, and I'm also Director of Research and Innovation in the Leeds Institute for Data Analytics. And personally, in terms of my own research, I'm funded by the Royal Academy of Engineering in the area of computational medicine and in silico trials. So it's using techniques that we actually utilize a lot in the context of aerospace and automotive industry, but trying to utilize them in the context particularly of medical devices. Other people work on drugs as well in the same context, and find ways in which we can accelerate the process of and shorten the process of generating evidence on safety and effectiveness of medical devices.
Fantastic, thank you, Alex. And Paolo.
Yeah, thank you, James, for letting me introducing. So I'm Paolo Guerra, I'm MedTech lead in PLG. PLG is a consulting company, just main playing leader from 20 years in pharmacovigilance. And now starting from 3 years, we are even providing services in order to drive with confidence the passage through the new challenges, regulatory challenges from MDD to MDR. IVD to AVDR, so knowing that the software as medical device will play a main role across in the regulation and compliance. So we are almost there, even with our consultants in UK to support this main change that is kind of massive change. And we are helping some of our partners and customers in order just to drive with confidence around the main changes, having the software as a main key and innovation as another main key players during this huge transition.
Fantastic, thank you, Paolo. And last but no means least, Michael Kipping. Michael, would you just like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi there. My name is Michael Kipping. I'm one of the health innovation leads at Innovate UK. So Innovate UK is part of UK Research and Innovation, and it's kind of like the Research Council for business. So we provide non-dilutive funding for UK life sciences SMEs, including medtech companies, to develop innovative new products.
Fantastic, thank you, Michael. And I think all of you have spoken about innovation, and actually a sense that actually in terms of the medtech sector, we are seeing massive technological innovation and change, and actually is the regulatory system fit for purpose in that regard. And perhaps if I come to the first question, and just thinking around what those current challenges are for business, and perhaps how regulatory divergence or some regulatory divergence from the EU is impacting the UK medtech sector. So perhaps if I come to you first, Michael, if you don't mind, and really just sort of start to think through some of those challenges, and then I'll bring in other panelists as well to overlay.
Sure. So, I mean, regulation is a balancing act. So at the one end of the spectrum, if you don't have any requirements like we did have before, say, thalidomide, then that's a real sort of challenge and really sort of critical patient safety issue in terms of making sure products are safe and effective. At the other end of the spectrum, if the requirements are really burdensome, then that's also impactful in a negative way on patient safety, because it means that companies are less likely to develop products because of the cost of compliance and the complexity of compliance. So I think at the moment we have a situation where historically the directives within the EU that the companies have been working to, so the Medical Device Directive, IVD and AIMD, were deemed to be insufficient. So that's why we developed these new medical device regulation, IVD regulation, which on the surface is kind of fine, the legislation itself, but the way it's been implemented has been really challenging. So we still haven't got harmonization of standards. We haven't really got the capacity of notified bodies that we need. guidance is coming out now, but still a bit patchy. So that's created uncertainty for companies, either developing new products or companies wanting to recertify products to the new CE requirements. And uncertainty is bad for innovation, because it's harder for investors to understand how they can make money out of this thing, because if you don't understand kind of what the evidence requirements will be and the timelines, and that's sort of really challenging. And from a UK perspective, first we've got Northern Ireland following CE mark, and then we've got Great Britain now following UK CA mark, which is the old directives, which are just said, were deemed to be insufficient. So we've got a situation in the UK at the moment where we will still continue to accept CE mark for a little while, but then we're reverting to the directives. So it's kind of it could be argued that it's a substandard sort of situation for patient safety.
Yeah.
And talked about the dearth of the shortage of notified body expertise in EU. That's amplified 100-fold, because we've only got like 2 or I think 3 maybe authorized bodies in the UK that can do that conformity assessment. So massively challenging for companies to get that clarity they need around the evidence to demonstrate conformity to whatever regulatory environment they're aiming for. And then a massive challenge for healthcare providers in terms of accessing products, because we will see a large reduction in availability of products on the market. So challenging times, but there are some really good opportunities in there as well.
Yeah, which we will focus on. And maybe I'll bring in Tim now, because Tim, we had a discussion again, similar sort of theme around that lack of certainty, but around status and classification. So what are you seeing at Orca?
Yeah, so I think the situation, actually, to be fair, whether it was under MDD or MDR, with software as medical devices, so the large bulk of digital health products, whether they're web-based or app-based, a huge degree of uncertainty about, first of all, whether a product is or isn't a medical device. And as I say, when we review about 70 products a week, and we have a panel every week, and the team bring the problem products, as it were, the ones where they're a bit unsure, to that panel, and it's almost 50-50 medical device queries or evidence queries. And so there are so many, so that's the sort of scale of the edge cases that we're seeing, where it's not really at all clear whether a product is or it isn't. And we very recently did a piece of work with Public Health England on the opportunities to digitize the health check that we all go through, 40, 50, 60, etc. And it was interesting, because our interpretation of the products, just to meet the core requirements to do a health check, was that they were going to be medical devices. But when we engaged with the relevant products, 50% of them agreed, and about 50% of those who agreed had already got certified, and the other 50% vehemently disagreed and produced, and in some instances produced, very long arguments as to why they weren't medical devices. And from our perspective, and in that case, Public Health England, it was like they were saying, well, who's right? And I was going, well, only MHRA in this situation could possibly tell us who's right, really, in that situation, because there is no definitive way of knowing it. So that's just an illustration of the scale of the edge cases that digital health innovation throws up. If you do, add this thing on to your product, has that taken you over the boundary into medical device status? And then the second area of huge uncertainty is the classification side of things. So am I a class 1? Am I a class 2? How does that all work? And we know that one of the biggest effects of MDR, of course, was to up-level many products. And that was something that was kind of more explicit in MDR than it is in MDD. But therefore, that area in terms of, have I got the right classification, is also very difficult to kind of identify and unclear. And for us, one of the things that we've always said we find odd is this sort of the very stark kind of boundaries around these sorts of things. Actually, in terms of genuine assurance, you could make the argument that until you're into a class 2 situation and notified bodies are doing a genuine assurance and a conformity assessment, nobody's really got huge amounts of additional kind of assurance, really, because class 1 is obviously self-certified. And then for everything that is not a class 1 but is everything else, and of which 70% of the digital health market isn't a class 1 device, probably, then what, does that just not require any assurance? And so there's all of these weird kind of cliff edges in the regulatory environment. And for us, it's actually should just be a single continuum where proportionately, a product just attracts more and more assurance as it goes through these layers. And I think medical device regs have sort of not, and this is not unique to medical device regs, of course, you could say the same about GDPR. Things like digital health innovation and the pace and scale of that has sort of left regulation a bit flat-footed.
Yeah, I think probably what we may look at is actually what other jurisdictions are doing, because I think there's some sense in terms of the approach the FDA is taking around software as a medical device is a very, very different approach, but it's very much looking at that continuum. And maybe we could sort of look at those kinds of issues. Before we do that, Paolo, if I just bring you into the discussion now, because clearly you are supporting medtech businesses with their regulatory strategy and actually looking at access to a range of different markets. So what sort of themes are you seeing and those challenges for your customers?
Yeah. As even Tim raised up, there is just a kind of different representation of the risk class according to the medical device regulation. That the main change is that now is a regulation, is not anymore a directive. So all the main manufacturers based within the European, just to clarify, need to be in compliance. Differently, they will be out of the law, like exactly the same for the application of the quality system regulation for the FDA. Just after this brief introduction, I fully agree that there is a raising up of the level. This is just in accordance to have a better level of compliance and a strict way to compliance for warranting the safety of the products for the safety of the patients mainly. However, what we can see is that there are kind of two different I may say evidences of, from one side, there is just a mislapping. So in any case, just a misinterpreting of the main regulations from different countries, and even just a creative or kind of separations of laws between Europe and UK, mainly for the commercial agreements, and is that per purpose that now it is mandatory to have a UK representative to be present on the UK territory for all medical device, but not only limited to, we are just mainly focused on that side. And from another side, fortunately, the main regulations, so we can refer to the new amendment of the 2002 emitted by the MHRA, is pointing to exactly to be adherent to the MDR, so not creating a kind of misunderstandings between the two regulations. However, due to the main part of the broken of the commercial agreements, most of the notified bodies needed to move from so from 40% of the notified body moved from the UK part, from the United Kingdom to Netherlands, to Germany, and so on, in order to have offices based within the European country to satisfy all the main requests to be in compliance with the MDR. Then it will be dramatically difficult for all the company based within UK, in any case, that need to be supported by a notified body based within UK, just having someone that take the lead in order to warrant the level of compliance, especially for what we could envisage in future for the UK conformity assessment. This just from the part of the pure regulation, so the pure rules. So we are struggling having clarified how to deal in terms of resources and timelines. We are opening offices even in UK just to be present on the territory to support with all the main day-by-day activities. That is our main concerns. And from another perspective related to innovations, the regulations, we can claim that is pretty clear, because once that you have clarified the risk classification that, as Tim even mentioned, need to get through a proper assessment, has not been just a kind of pre-internal assessment. So most of the time you need to have a proper strong rationale behind the claim of the risk class of the device. Starting even from that point, regarding the main innovation key, we are speaking about having a digital health software as main part of the innovation. So we can envisage that all the new devices all will be included in a kind of digital health solutions, or we will have software as a medical device as part of a telemedicine, for instance, or connected to a telemedicine systems. So the software will play a huge role in the future of the innovations, and the regulation is following, deploying clear rules. I'm referring to the MDR Rule 11 and the similar of the 2002 regulation. However, we need just to get clear that there are some standards that need to get harmonized against the main regulation. So this has been deployed by the European Commission during April, so the harmonized standard list. And in UK today, there is not this kind of straightforward pointing to ISO standards in order to get clarified where could be just a most clarification, not only according to some guidances that now are coming out from the MHRA, quite clearly defining the main rules how to assess the risk class, and we are helping in order just to get harmonized and to get adherent to the main requirements of the ISO standards, because we do believe that is the main key, because sooner or later all the main competent authorities will refer and shall refer to the ISO standards that are going to clarify all the different, I may say, gray area of the compliance.
Yeah, no, that's really useful, Paolo, and I think we'll come back on those themes in terms of regulatory cooperation. I think there's a sort of general theme about actually working across jurisdictions. I think you started to get into some of those technological innovations as well, and I'm keen actually to maybe talk and explore that a bit more. And I mean, Alex, you're very much sort of at the fringe in terms of looking at some of these new methodologies, these new technologies, because clearly that then allows us almost to define and think around those changes to the regulatory system, Alex. So what are those themes that you are seeing within the innovation space?
Yeah, so one of the things I'd like to add to what Tim was saying earlier is the fact that technologies are becoming also more complex. So he was explaining the difficulty in terms of defining in which category a particular device is. I would argue that certain devices are probably more than one category as well, because they have a software component, they have a hardware component. So we see this convergence of technologies that is an additional level of complexity. And also in some cases, and I'm thinking particularly in AI, some of the systems we are developing are meant to be learning as well. So the knowledge base that they base to be evolving. Or if you think in terms of some of the trends in sort of more customized device, design and manufacturing, there is an element as well of what are you actually certifying? The device is going to be built, on a per individual cases, more or less, or at least per groups. So it's more about probably certifying the process in itself. So the point I'm trying to get is there is a need to look at this more holistically than just merely a problem with, although I think it's quite important with the regulators, but it is also an opportunity to look at things in a completely different way. So two specific trends that I can point out. One is using real world data as evidence. So not always thinking that you need to go through the typical cycles of generated evidence by a prospective study with all the costs and delays. And the other thing is, and related in a sense as well to that, is the need to work in creating virtual populations and virtual trials where you actually can predict the outcome, predict certain elements at least of the outcome much earlier on, so you can kill devices and designs that are unlikely to be successful with much simpler source of evidence, but also you create a much better understanding on the mechanisms of action, of operation of those devices, that leads you to generate devices which are more unlikely to fail down the line. So that's something that you were referring before about benchmarking with other places as well. I see there is a lot of work going on, at least for the last 10 years, from FDA. As I think we were talking earlier, there is a document from earlier this year from FDA called Advancing Regulatory Science and indicating areas of focus, which some of the ones I mentioned are there as well. But I also know that there is similar effort in Europe in that space. So in a sense, the opportunity that I think Brexit brings is the possibility to learn from all of these efforts going elsewhere and have a very solid ecosystem for regulation and innovation within the UK that would be able to attract industry as well to test devices in the country or other type of medical products.
That's a really interesting dynamic, and we'll come back to. I've got an open question for you all in a bit. But Karen, can I just bring you into the discussion and just talk a bit more about some of those broader industry trends that you're
sure. I think as as Alex has said, it is getting much more complicated. Not only we've got companion diagnostics for prescribing and personalized medicine, we've got prescription digital therapeutics. FDA's have approved a number of those for use. I do believe that we have to learn from what works well elsewhere, but we do have an opportunity. I think we're ignoring we haven't spoken about some of the wider infrastructure we have here in the UK that is working also at trying to be more transparent, trying to help companies get the right products and understand the level of data that's necessary or evidence that's necessary, including real world data. And there's the nice portal to try and help companies define what their medical device is. Then we have the MedTech Catalyst. We have seen during COVID particularly how regulators have worked very differently with all the other stakeholders in the health ecosystem to try and bring innovations to patients more quickly. And then I suppose the other thing that I've been thinking about while we're talking, we have to remember the reason for regulation, and it's patient safety. So as we have all these new innovations, being able to provide assurance to both the healthcare providers and patients that these devices are going to be safe to use. So, we just have to try and balance this very complex picture. And I know there's uncertainty with new regulations coming in, but there's also some more clarity as we see how that impacts the industry.
Yeah. There is that balancing act, and I think it's clearly not a case of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of very, very good infrastructure already there. It's about how we develop that. And I think actually something that, during from a discussion I had with Michael a few days ago, I think Michael, you said actually a possible approach is sort of TGA type approach. People have spoken about the FDA as well. So thinking around those things about sort of what can we, because I agree Brexit does free us up to develop those relationships elsewhere. What are those sort of best of breed practices elsewhere that we could take on board? So perhaps if I bring in Michael first of all, and then we'll bring in other panelists to that discussion.
Sure. So firstly, looking at the NHS, firstly our home market, they need a huge range of different medical devices, including diagnostics and digital health. So we used to estimate MHRA there are around 500,000 different unique medical devices. That probably wasn't including digital, so you could probably add another 300,000. Most of it, Tim's nodding, most of those are zombies kind of wandering and no one doing anything with them. But there's a huge number of products that are needed. So on the one hand, we need to maintain supply. So having a TGA style approach where we accept CE mark and maybe FDA approval and maybe some other approvals could be, a really pragmatic way to go. I don't see us being able to or wanting to have a standalone system for UK, and either MHRA employing another 3,000 people to do conformity assessment in an FDA style approach, or there being enough of a business opportunity for TÜV-SÜDs and various other notified bodies to set up kind of authorized bodies in the UK to do conformity assessment. So I think a good pragmatic approach would be to have, as I said, sort of accepting other regulatory approvals, but then having the opportunity to have enhanced oversight for specific areas. So for digital health, for instance, and everything that encompasses, safety isn't just around that conformity assessment to get a tick in the box, a UKCA mark or a CE mark. It's a holistic process where the vigilance side and post-market surveillance side is key. So actually, the systems and infrastructure we have in place in the UK could facilitate a different type of regulatory delivery approach to how we actually go about doing regulation in the UK and ensuring patient safety that other countries might not be able to do because they don't have the infrastructure. So that there could be really good examples and opportunities to do to diverge around specific areas. Another area might be ATMPs, for instance.
Yeah.
So I think there are those opportunities. I think the other challenge is that we're talking about sort of discrete medical devices or diagnostics, but around 20-30% of products that go to FDA are combination products. So having a system that's able to deal with, either medicines and medical devices or a cosmetic medical, whatever it might be, is also challenging. So it's making sure that we have a system that's robust, that can deal with kind of a broad range of products. And that's why I for one, given where we are at the moment, would be quite keen to see that TGA style where we have a blended approach.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on panelists? Tim, did you have a view on this in terms of those best of breed systems elsewhere?
We currently are building accreditation models and processes in 9 different countries, so ranging from New Zealand, Israel, the Nordics writ large, Canada, and the US. And in those conversations, we've spoken to regulators, the FDA, and many others. And for me, what's emerging from that is essentially what you might describe as grey regulation, because these aren't the results of what we're developing are not regulations, they're not legislative. They are much more adaptable, they're much more dynamic. The way we build these assessments is, as I say, proportionate. So they build on the characteristics of the products and put layers of assurance in place dependent on that characteristic set. So instead of just having you are in the regulatory space or you're not in the regulatory space, every digital health product that we assess is assessed at one level or another. And by the time you get right to the top end, where you're talking about medical devices, the level of regulation assurance is appropriately tough. But the other thing that I think that we also advocate is use modern methods to do all of that. So I think the thing that people often say, well, how do Orca manage to do 200-300 assessments a month, and can those assessments possibly be rigorous and all the rest of it? And Michael's had a good route around at what we do based on the fact that he comes from that background as well in terms of those most rigorous assessments in terms of notified body activity and the like. And I think the reality is that the combination of the way we do it, we use technology, we use data. Obviously, we also use a very professional assessor resource as well, means that you can do these things much more quickly. And actually, when you put kind of old world regulation and the assessment that is inherent in that, and compare it to what we're doing, the pace and scale of the way we're doing it is light years ahead of this, and it's possible to do. So a lot of what we battle is the sense that if you carry on doing it the old way, you'll never keep pace with the technology change and the scale of products and everything else that digital health offers. So you have to bring regulation into the digital age. You have to have digital regulation for digital, for the digital age, if you want to put it that way. And there are ways of doing it. And what's more, you don't need to have these random cliff edges where some products just don't get any regulation at all and some have a huge amount of regulation. I think that's that doesn't make any sense to us in certainly in the digital health space.
Yep. Any other views from panelists on that issue? Paolo?
Yes, just a couple of comments. So I like so much the approach that Michael is keeping into this panel, because today the regulators and even notified bodies are moving forward with some common plans, like the medical device single audit plan, in order to cover different areas, geographical areas. So it seems that we are moving forward in that approach, and not only regulators but even competent authorities and national authorities like Swiss Medic just published 10 days ago that are fully keeping the MDR compliance, so they are accepting to have the CE marking as a first step of the compliance for entering in the Swiss market. So Switzerland is going through a kind of breaking commercial rules like the UK have done with the Brexit. So they are doing similar to what Michael was exactly mentioning. So I do believe that is the key for the future. Just having some base. Yeah,
definitely. And I think if I bring into this now, this weighty tool that Michael, I think, flagged last week when it was published, the Tiger, which is obviously now out there, the report about regulatory reform within a range of sectors, which obviously includes life sciences and MedTech. I mean, Michael, you said that there was some useful stuff in there. And what I'm quite keen really just to sense check as that sort of almost the last theme is actually, what should we now be doing? So I think we've had a broad discussion around what those challenges are, how businesses are adapting, some of those best of breed processes elsewhere, but what should we now be doing within the UK? And actually, I suppose, how do we drive change as well as a sector? Because that's one of the big keys. Michael, I think you said actually tick box in some areas, less of more of an issue in other areas. But what were your thoughts?
Okay, so I'll split it into four areas. So we've got the legislation and requirements. So MDR, IVDR, to me, they're not perfect, but they're pretty good. And MHRA team did a hell of a lot of the work putting them together. So if we were to accept them, I'd have no problem with that. So we could, there'll be an element of, do we want to look at the legislation itself? But that's just one particular element, and that typically is the key focus when there's a scandal. So the reason MDR, IVDR happened was because of PIP breast implants, however many years ago, it was now 10 years ago. So that's an element, but that's just one way of us sort of kind of looking at the overriding situation. There's regulatory science and innovation. So if we want to, say we want to reduce the reliance on animal testing, perhaps we could get Alex and his team in Leeds to do a load of work on in silico trials for us. But we can't just do that. We need to have the evidence base to demonstrate that that's an efficacious evidence base for regulators and for clinical providers to accept. We need to develop the right standards. We need to have the right skill sets. So the regulatory science is really developing alongside new technologies like AI, like ATMPs and distributed manufacturing. It's developing the underpinning science and technology to enable those to be regulated and adopted. We've got regulatory delivery. So I think Tim touched about how ORCA actually delivers their service. So notified bodies certainly historically would look at a technical file, a person would review it, maybe it's a team that reviews it. So how could we take a more of a data-driven approach to the regulatory delivery itself, especially for digital? Why are we sitting down with an expert who says yes or no and gives it a tick in the box? Perhaps a stage process that Tim outlined, like we do with hip replacements, where they have different ODEP ratings, and the level of evidence leads to a higher ODEP rating. I'm sure there are some interesting opportunities around regulatory delivery. And then the final bit is enabling companies to navigate the regulatory requirements themselves. Why is it so hard to navigate the requirements? So, by that, if we could support, obviously I'm biased, I'm looking at UK SMEs, but more broadly, if we could support the sector to navigate the requirements for, maybe it's FDA, maybe it's whatever the requirements are, that would enable them to develop the right evidence base at the outset, rather than thinking about regulation towards the end of the commercial R&D process. Enable them to collect the right evidence base and understand the costs and timelines. So that makes it easier for them to get investment or to fail fast. So those 4 areas for me.
Yeah, fantastic. And Alex, your team was mentioned, I think, in Michael's response on that. Do you want to come in and just talk about some of the some of that work that you are doing, particularly around the the regulatory science space?
Yeah. So basically, what we are to generate the evidence Michael was referring to is the evidence that in silico trials, and you could put any other approach, is a valid source of evidence gathering. What we are trying to do is actually demonstrate that through this approach we can replicate results from existing trials and also provide additional insight compared to what conventional trials provide. So there is a paper actually coming out tomorrow in Nature Communications where we have done that in a particular type of device. But what we found is that is exactly what Michael and others have said, that this is a really good opportunity to better understand the whole process. So we work together with clinicians, but also with epidemiologists. We think that it's quite important that we instill this way of thinking as well in those who actually are the recognized people in designing trials, because there has to be a different approach to those as well. And we work together with them to understand the best way to do it. The other thing that Michael mentioned that I think is quite useful as well, quite important as well, is this idea of normalizing the evidence. So in the community where I work scientifically in medical imaging, what we did some years ago, about 10 years now, we found that we were developing the predecessors to AI algorithms, and everybody was demonstrating them in their own preferred data set. It was a nightmare to compare different algorithms from different labs. So we came up with this idea of challenges, which is basically we put out there a data set and everybody competes and compares against the same ground truths. And then there is publications that essentially do that benchmarking. And what I notice is that FDAs are starting to do in certain areas similar things, where they put a specific data sets for benchmark, and they allow the community to learn through the process about generating that evidence. So I'm wondering whether one of the solutions, Tim was asking earlier today, is there ways in which we can generate better evidence? I'm wondering whether one of the solutions is generating sets which are common. Now, they cannot be the only source, because otherwise it's like giving you the exam question and then everybody will learn the answer to that. But at least to start having some sets where you can compare apples to apples the performance of different techniques and that that address. And what we found is when you try to do that, you realize how difficult it is to define things like outcome or performance in the first place, because these are very qualitatively defined nowadays in many cases and based on the current systems that we have to measure that and ways to do observations. Well, what we need is to have a bit more, sort of mechanistic approach systematic approach to define those metrics, which you can only do when you have common reference sets. And in other domains of standards, they've been doing the same thing, having a specific data sets that everybody works against.
Fantastic. And Karen, anything to add around that?
I think it comes back to the sort of collaborative approach to regulation. We aren't operating in a silo. We are looking at the same types of challenges that our other regulators are looking at across the world, and so learning from them. I suppose one of the issues that we haven't touched on is, and it's been mentioned about the need for the regulators to adopt more modern approaches to regulation. They also need the skills and talent in their workforce to do that, and that's something that we need to focus on, creating, not just for the regulators but for the companies themselves and for the healthcare providers, that they all have got access to the skills and talent needed to move into a more digital, AI-enabled, connected medical devices world. And ultimately, that's where we're moving. And for healthcare providers, they're looking for new funding models. They're looking at value-based healthcare, precision, personalized medicine. All of these things need agreement across the system on standards, on the evidence requirements, the real world evidence. So it's about, I just think we should be building on what we've seen, come back to what I said before, what we've seen during COVID of a different collaborative approach between the different stakeholders and players in the ecosystem to work together to drive a future for medtech companies in the UK that is not constrained and regulations seen as a barrier to it being successful. And I think the power is within all the different stakeholders in the UK. And it sounds easy to say, I know that. I know there's a lot of uncertainty, but I think we've got to have a proactive, positive approach to this. Otherwise, we'll get left behind from other countries.
Absolutely. But how do we? I mean, so what I'm hearing actually a more holistic approach, absolutely, but flex within that. But this powerful point about engaging the broader community around this. How do we drive that change? I mean, all the stuff in the Tiger report, there's some good stuff within that. But at the moment, it's just words on paper. How do we drive that change? Any thoughts as a community? Any thoughts from the panel?
I think.
Yeah, please keep on, Alex. Sorry.
No, I was saying, I think what unified, I fully agree with Karen. I think what unified COVID was a common enemy, a common problem that we were trying to solve, right? So I think it's identifying ways to define specific challenges. And I think this happened in the example I was given before with the challenges, was defining a particular problem. So I think it's about identifying areas where we can have quicker wins that are somehow exemplary of a much broader opportunity, and seeing how from those you can generate the training that Karen was referring, the show when we can do it, like COVID show, like aligning people. So I think that would be my suggestion basically there. Any other
thoughts, Paolo?
Yeah, if I may, I believe that the UK and indeed MedTech has now the great opportunity to drive the change through new digital tools, as mentioned by everyone today. Just a kind of a common database or common tools where they can put all a kind of raw data, so everyone would be beneficial to cut the time to market, the time to have some clinical evidences in order to be interconnected in a proper regulated manner. So just and only the regulators can handle this kind of data, and this will allow to drive the change, because differently we will fall in the same situation like we are falling in Europe with the UDAMED. UDAMED is in delay and is only a kind of a main registration collectors of some evidences, but is not a dynamic tool where all the main players, so manufacturers, distributors, regulators, and so on, can really point to having beneficials to cut some time to market, to have some references in order just to be beneficial of just not only a one-way direction database, but a two-way directions proactive, digital tool. So this is just a main comment.
Okay, fantastic. That's been a fabulous discussion. We've covered an awful lot of ground. I got that sense in terms of engagement with the broader community, more holistic response, data-driven goals, matching and mapping that technological innovation going forward. But without further ado, because I think we're at the end of the session, I just wanted to thank all the panelists for their insights today. I think it's been a great discussion, and thank you very much.